swiftly on to our next speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Chris Rossdale, who's a senior lecturer in politics and international relations right here at the University of Bristol. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm going to keep my comments relatively brief because I want to make sure we've got time for questions. I'm going to say two things. One about the British arms trade itself and kind of its role in the world, and then cycle back to universities. Really close like that? Oh, hello. Okay. I think it's worth taking a beat to think about what the role of the arms trade is within Britain and within the UK. Why does Britain have an arms trade? Why does the British government expend so much political capital and political attention and resources making sure Britain has a cutting-edge arms trade? And I think it's worth thinking about the role that the arms trade, that Britain's arms trade played within Britain's imperial history. You know, Britain had a global empire, despite having much less land, much smaller populations than a lot of other. Really close. Oh, jeez. Okay. So Britain had a global empire, despite not having the resources, not having the land, despite not having the population that other kind of imperial cores had. And there's a few reasons for that, but one of the really important reasons for that is that the British Empire became incredibly adept at moving high-tech weaponry around the world, and at making sure that it was staying at the cutting edge of weapons development. You know, this was really fundamental to Britain's emergence as a global empire, was its emergence as a kind of global hub for the circulation of weapons. You know, and that develops over 300-400 years. And it hasn't stopped. You know, Britain still has aspirations to remain kind of at the center of global politics, despite its declining status as a kind of an economic power, and maintaining the kind of the advanced state of Britain's, you know, maintaining Britain as a kind of high-level player in the global arms industry is part of a kind of neo-imperial politics of staying kind of at the top table of world politics. So the arms trade really matters. So despite the fact that the arms trade isn't particularly economically kind of important, it plays this materially and ideologically really central role in kind of reproducing Britain's global power. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that when we're talking about the arms trade, it's not there by accident, and it's not there for kind of, you know, often the kind of line is, well, it provides jobs. Lots of things provide jobs. Like, this is playing a different kind of role within Britain's status in the world. And it's for that reason that the government gives the arms trade kind of really outsized support as an industry in terms of subsidies, in terms of diplomatic support and diplomatic cover, in terms of massive guarantees on export loans. Like, the government goes out of its way to kind of make sure this industry is at the cutting edge. And, you know, to some extent, that's where universities come in. Like, universities are really important. You know, Britain having a kind of very high-level university sector with kind of world-leading scholarship, you know, we can think is good for lots of reasons, but like, one of the reasons that is really important for the state is that it allows that kind of technological cutting edge that is integral to the arms trade. So when we critique the arms trade on university campuses, we're kind of finding a route into much wider complexes of Britain's global and imperial power. Like, we're taking on something really significant in doing that. Like, Carmen makes the really important point that, you know, it hasn't always been this way. Certainly, Britain's universities were to some extent involved in imperial politics. You know, the knowledge production that imperialism relied on, the disciplinary kind of technologies that imperialism relied on. But in terms of kind of a technologically advanced arms industry, well, that was massively state subsidized for a lot of Britain's history, or state owned for a lot of Britain's history. It wasn't necessary in the same way. But everything right now is in the context of neoliberalism and austerity. And I mean, you can blame Margaret Thatcher. It's always nice when you can blame Margaret Thatcher for things. You know, in the 80s, Thatcher kind of decides that Britain's universities aren't tied enough to industry, because everything should be tied to industry as much as possible. She had this concern that these are spaces that are kind of, hotbeds of critique, but also a bit kind of ivory towerish. When they should be more connected with industry, they should be kind of generating kind of knowledge and knowledge and expertise for industry. And so the Thatcher government starts a process of defunding Britain's universities that we're still living in and that we're obviously very familiar with. Essentially starting what becomes a permanent funding crisis. Like, Britain's universities are in a permanent funding crisis, which it makes it very hard to say no to money from arms companies because we can't turn away the money that we are being offered. That's one of the reasons this conversation is often so difficult to have within UCU, because there's that kind of adoption of a slight austerity mindset. Well, that's money coming in. We be careful, and that's our jobs. So I think, that permanent funding crisis isn't an accident. It creates a coercive structure. Like, as you said, Carmen, like, the VC is very fond of saying, well, our relationship with the arms trade, this is a matter of academic freedom. Scholars should be able to freely choose what projects they work with. And it's an absolute misnomer to say that's a question of academic freedom. This is a coercive structure, a permanent funding crisis that puts universities into this panic mode where they kind of have to take whatever they can get. And where saying no to things becomes very difficult because of that kind of permanent crisis situation. And so the research that's being done in universities and the teaching it's appalling that the teaching that is done is suddenly shaped by the projects that arms companies are funding, the project that the Ministry of Defence is funding, and so forth. But this is a coercive structure through which the research and education done in universities is militarised as a response to that kind of neoliberal funding crisis. In that respect, I started by saying we need to think about challenging the arms trade on campuses as part of challenging a kind of broader imperial politics. It's also part of challenging a broader neoliberal politics, right? The fight against the militarization of universities is also the fight against the kind of neoliberalization and the kind of gutting of universities as public spaces. And so, that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to link struggles and to think more broadly in that respect. The fight against this stuff needs to be part of a wider fight for the soul of higher education. I'm going to finish there, but I'm going to say one more thing, which is, if you look at the last 20, 30 years of the development of the kind of the role of militarized power, the arms trade, the military within universities, that gets really interwoven with the story of the securitization of universities as well, with the increased kind of monitoring, the increased security presence, the increased kind of relentless kind of monitoring of students, visa monitoring of students. These are really tightly intertwined programs because universities suddenly become sites of kind of national security. They suddenly become sites of privileged corporate interests. And so they become sites where actually students become dangerous to the institution because it's relying on processes and politics and forms of extraction that a lot of us hate. And so there's a really interwoven story of universities becoming militarized and universities becoming extremely securitized. It's useful to link these things together because then we can think broader and in more kind of coalitional ways about the relationships we can make in order to fight them. And I think that's what some of the next speakers are going to talk about. So I'll leave it there.